This video will show you how to write the rest of your APA formatted paper on a research study. So you've already done the introduction and reference page in a different video. So this is taking those items and adding to it your methods, results, discussion, and adding anything to your reference page you need to add. So you'll already have the title page set up. You'll have an abstract page that is still blank because the abstract is written last after the full rough draft is completed. And you'll have an introduction of at least 7 paragraphs that is titled by the title of your paper. And the first paragraph is going to give a vivid example and major definitions. Paragraphs 2 through 6 are going to each describe a different scholarly research study on your topic, saying who was in the study, what was done, what was found, and then explicitly stating what that means for your study. And then a description of your study at the end with the hypotheses, the rationale for your hypotheses, and the dependent variable with an operationalization for that dependent variable. And then on the last page, you'll have your references. So after that last paragraph of your introduction, on the same page, you press enter right after the last word in the introduction. You center it, bold it, and you type the word methods. So you notice that it doesn't start on its own page, it starts on the same page, just double spaced down. And there are 2 major things that you're going to be describing in your methods. You're going to be describing the subjects who are in your study, and you're going to be describing the procedures of your study. So sometimes people like to use subheadings for that. They're not required, but they're helpful. So if we were to use subheadings, we might type subjects and then bold it and italicize it, and it would go all the way to the left as a subheading. And then the next double space line down, we would write about your subjects. So in this section, you're going to state how many people participated in your study. You're going to list out their age, gender, and racial background. You want to state where you found them. And if you give them any pay or gave them a cover story, how you approached them and recruited them for this study. So on this particular study, which is looking at how target attractiveness and target gender affects ratings of that target's personality trait, we might state that there were 84 people in our study total, which was a mixture of ages between 18 and 60, but most people in the middle age range, with a even divide of men and women and mostly white racial background. And you might say, we found them by approaching them in the Dulles Center Mall in Sterling, Virginia on a weekend in October of 2018. We did not offer pay for our study and instead just approached people and asked them if they would fill out a short survey for a class study. So this is, you're stating how many people were in this study, what their age, gender, and racial backgrounds were, where you found them, and how you recruited them for this study. Then your next section, you might head with a subheading of procedures, and it would be, again, bolded and italicized and all the way to the left. And then the paragraph would start just double spaced down from that. So in your procedures, you're going to state step by step in paragraph form what you did. And make sure that you describe who you were, not by name, but list off anybody who approached people in the study. So if you approached people and you gave them a survey, you want to say, okay, a white middle-aged female, approached people saying, would you do this survey for my class? They were dressed in casual clothing. So you're describing yourself in terms of clothing, age, race, gender, and what you were doing and what you said to people. So describe the experimenters and how they looked and how they approached subjects. Then, if they presented them with a survey, you want to describe how they were recruited for that study, and then what they saw in the survey, and actually tell them to look in the appendix so that they can see the survey. And then you would describe how you thanked them for it at the end. If you were doing a quasi-experiment where you're staging an event where everybody's looking up at the top of the building to induce conformity, you would state how the people were dressed in all conditions. So you would say, in the high attractive condition, our group members were dressed so-and-so, see appendix for pictures. And then in the low attractiveness condition, they were dressed this way, see appendix for pictures. And you would describe the experimenters as age, race, and gender. You would say how many of them there were in each condition, and you would say where they were when they were looking up at the top of the building. So all the little details are in the methods, and you need to be so clear in your methods that someone reading your paper could exactly copy you and do exactly the same thing. So again, in the procedures section, you're going to describe the experimenters, how they looked, how they approached or interacted with subjects. Then if you did a scene that you staged, you're going to take pictures of it and then refer people to the appendix so we can see as readers what the subjects saw. Or if you approach people with a survey, you're going to include the survey in the appendix and then refer us in the procedures to that appendix. So we gave them a 5-minute survey, supposedly on person perception, and then see appendix for the survey. In half of the conditions, subjects saw a picture of a beautiful woman. In half, they saw a picture of an ugly woman. In half, they saw a picture of a beautiful man, and half they saw a picture of a ugly man. So actually it would be quarters. A quarter saw this, a quarter saw that. Okay. Then they rated them. They rated the target on a set of personality traits, including intelligence, kindness, trustworthiness, generosity, open-mindedness on a 7-point scale, 1 equaling not very much, 7 equaling very much. So after you go through the whole procedure and you fill out exactly what you did in every condition, then you double space down and you start the results section. And the results, that word should be bolded and should be in the middle. So this is going to be the shortest section of your paper, and in it you're going to give the exact numbers of all the important conditions from your data table. Make sure that it follows grammatical rules about how many sentences minimum should be in a paragraph, and that it makes grammatical sense. But you're going to have at least 4 numbers stated here because you have 2 hypotheses, and each hypothesis is stated as a comparison between conditions. So you need 2 numbers to compare per hypothesis. So again, in paragraph form, state all the number subjects need, or all the number readers need to know to see if your hypotheses were supported or not. Somewhere in this section, you should say, see table 1. So you're referring the reader to look at the data in the data table later on in this paper. And you're not restating your hypotheses in the results because that's actually happening in the discussion section, which comes next. So discussion, that word's going to be bolded and it's going to be centered. And then you're going to, in the first section, restate your hypotheses and whether or not they were supported, and then why or why not they were supported. So restate your hypotheses one by one. State whether or not it was supported. And why or why not. So if it was supported, you would just repeat the rationales from the introduction. So if my hypothesis is that the target's personality traits will be rated more positively if the target is attractive versus unattractive, I might say, okay, we hypothesized that attractive targets would receive more positive personality trait ratings than unattractive targets. This hypothesis was supported, most likely because of the halo effect, where people assume attractive people have positive traits. So you're just restating what you found. If you get results that disconfirm your hypothesis, you might point to some flaw in your study. So a way to do that, let's say your hypothesis about target gender, you expected women to be rated more positively than men, but they weren't. You might state, we also hypothesized that women would be rated more positively than men. However, this hypothesis was not supported. It is likely that many people in our sample were men and therefore had boosted impressions of men compared to women. So you might say there, this was caused by sample bias. So after you restate your hypothesis, state whether or not it's supported and why or why not in paragraph form. Then you're going to start talking about limitations. There's no such thing as a perfect study, and as students, you're especially going to have flaws in your study. So you need to have a section that lists out the major flaws to your study and why they're flaws, giving the vocab terms. So list out major flaws in your study, stating the appropriate vocab term, and why it's a problem. So if you did a survey, then you might say one problem to our study is sample bias. We only asked people in Northern Virginia who were free on Wednesday in the middle of the day. So we disproportionately had rich housewives filling out our survey, and they don't represent the general population. So you're saying the word sample bias, which is the vocab term. You're saying why it's a problem. They don't represent the population. And you're doing that in paragraph form. Then in the limitation section, you should also list out at least one way that a future study could fix this problem. So in this section, you could say future studies should reconduct the study all over the United States with men and women of different ages and different races to get results that will generalize to the population. So you would state at least one improvement to your study and why it would be an improvement. Okay, so there's going to be several paragraphs in your limitation section because you're going to have multiple flaws to your study. And then you should have a section that's titled Implications or Take Home Message, where you're finishing up talking about your research study by saying, here's what you should take home about our study. So in real life, how should people think or act given the results of your study? So in the implications section, you might state for this paper, which is looking at the effects of target attractiveness and target gender on ratings for the target personality, you might state here that turns out people are really shallow and they commit the halo effect all the time, where they think beautiful people are somehow better than less attractive people. So we should all take very good care of dressing appropriately before we leave the house, should we meet someone that we care what their impression is. So again, your implications is just one paragraph stating what the reader should take home about the world, real life, their thoughts, their behavior pattern, given the results of your study. Okay. Now, wherever that ends, you start a new page, and that new page is going to have your references. And then after your references, you're going to insert a page break. And the first page after your references is going to be your data table. So it should be table 1, and then you should have a title for your table. And then you should have the table. So that's already done and explained in another assignment, so we're going to skip that there. So after the data table, you're going to insert a page break, and then you're going to have the appendix. And if you have just one thing you're showing people, so maybe it's a survey, you use the word appendix, singular, and you'll bold it. But if you have multiple things you're showing people in your appendix, so say you had 4 conditions in which people were dressed differently and there were a different number of people in the group, then you would have Appendix A for the first picture, and then you would label that with whatever condition it is. And then the next page would be Appendix B with the second picture labeled with whatever condition that was. So large group, highly attractive. Then Appendix C and Appendix D for the other 2 pictures, each with labels. So your very last pages of your paper are going to be the appendices. And that's how you finish up writing your research paper in APA format in Microsoft Word.